Well, hello everyone, and welcome to my special webinar on or seminar on Emmanuel Todd's Defeat of the West. And both Charlotte, thank you for joining me live, and also anyone watching this on the replay. I hope you enjoy this. This is intended as like a introduction, I guess, to Emmanuel Todd's book, where I really outline the main ideas, give you a sort of English translation of the the structure of the book, including a couple of key passages highlighted, so people can sort of understand the book even if they don't know French. And because one of the curious things about this book is it's been translated into 20 languages now, but I saw a video or interview with Emmanuel Todd recently where he said that he's made the decision himself not to get it published in English, at least not for now. I mean, at some point, I wonder whether there will be overwhelming pressure for him to do so. But he sort of prioritized, I guess, the other language communities of the world. So it's been published in 20 languages, including, I think, most recently in German. So anyhow, that's the intent of the presentation. So I'll just share my screen. Okay, so Defeat of the West, why Emmanuel Todd is right. And in this presentation, as I said, I want to just cover the sort of main ideas, three essential ideas that Emmanuel Todd uses in this book. I've covered a couple of these in YouTube videos, but I want to just narrow down a little bit on three key ideas in this presentation to sort of inform the reading of the book, and then provide a chapter-by-chapter sort of outline summary with a couple of key passages translated, and then just talk a little bit about some of Emmanuel Todd's own comments about what might come next, both in terms of if the West is defeated, I guess, and how to sort of assess his claims about that, or I guess what I think about it, and how to sort of make use of his ideas even if you don't read French. So let's talk about the main ideas. And there's a couple of different ways in which in the book Emmanuel Todd defines the defeat of the West, including towards the end. But broadly, this quote, I think, seems to capture the key idea that I really want to focus on that helps, I think, really understand the nature of the argument in the book, where he says, "A simple truth will appear: the Western crisis is the engine of the history we are experiencing. Some knew it at the end of the war. No one will be able to deny it anymore." So he sees a Western crisis, a sort of a social history problem, if you like, a problem in Western society that is driving the problems the West is encountering in the war in Ukraine, leading to his prediction of the strategic defeat of the West. And in that respect, he's described himself as one of the last Annales School historians of mentalities. Annales School is like a 20th century French school of history, which was both very quantitative. It looked at like bread prices and all this kind of quantitative data over a long spans of time, but also related that to the sort of often unspoken fundamental social beliefs that are there within a social group, which is what they talk about with mentalities. And that's, I guess, in a way, in many ways, that's the best way to understand Emmanuel Todd's ideas. Some people talk about him as a kind of airy-fairy French intellectual, but he's really a very empirical historical sociologist. Technically, he's really a demographer, and his book is full of detailed statistics and charts about infant mortality, population issues, and other sort of things. And his social history of the West really converges on this sense that it's self-destructing in the conflict in Ukraine, that it's making reckless strategic decisions. And in a way, what he wants to do is find a way that the history, sociology, cultural, anthropological, demographic analysis can actually explain, well, why why was there this self-destructive mentality? And he elaborates it here on this passage where he describes the US and its dependencies as a post-imperial state, which is explained a little bit later on in the book. That America retains the military machine of the empire. It no longer has at its heart a culture carrying intelligence, and this is why it engages in practice in thoughtless and contradictory actions. And in this respect, in some ways, he's quite a contrast to one of the other great critics of the war in Ukraine, like John Mearsheimer from the realist school of international relations. He doesn't assume, states act rationally. He says, well, they evidently don't act rationally. So what is it about their culture and their society that sort of drives those kind of issues? And at the core of the book is this idea that he has that the West, which is defined a bit later on in the book, is in a zero state of religion, or if you like, a zero state of shared belief. And again, it's a sociological, historical comment. It's not saying if only people believed in God, the world would be fine, sort of thing. It's more saying that there's a particular cultural history of the West, that it really took off with Protestantism in the 16th century, and that sort of defined a lot of its sociological, cultural, political cultural character. In this way, he's very much in the school of Max Weber, who talked about the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism as a way to explain the divergence between, European societies and the rest of the world in that sort of time period. But he has the additional thing that one of the things he really focuses on is that Protestantism also very much encouraged literacy in particularly Protestant countries of the West, Europe and North America, and also it led to a kind of there was a sort of a religious belief in the elect or manifest destiny, if you like, which has affected their viewpoint. But in a way, he presents a different version of the story of secularization, where he talks about three states of active religion, zombie religion, and zero state religion. And he relates these to, empirical, quantitative tests of religious practice like marriage, certificates, church attendance, that's baptisms and that kind of thing. And in saying that we're at a zero state, he sort of dates this around about 2000, really, I guess at the turning point of the debates around same-sex marriage. Again, not having a position on that, but really talking about if marriage is no longer defined as a religious sacrament, but as a kind of a relationship institution within the society, then that is perhaps the core test of whether there is zero real presence of religion in society. And Charlotte, I think you mentioned the book that he wrote about lineages of femininity, I think, and I think he elaborates on some of those issues in that from memory. But the core thing, and again, a lot of these arguments about the demographic, social character of the West are similarly described in Lineages of Humanity. Both of those books have been translated into English. But the consequences of this for that self-destructive mentality is that there's no sort of shared guiding ethical values forming the leadership elites of society. And this is contributing to a kind of a social crisis in the West that is most acute in the leader of the West, the United States. And again, it's not just the United States is Babylon or sort of it's in moral decline. He supports this argument with all sorts of demographic statistics about life expectancy, inequality, the deindustrialized economy, education for stratification, and it's sort of the conduct of its leadership elite. Has the most striking statistic, given that Emmanuel Todd's first book in the early 1970s was a prediction that the Soviet Union would collapse based on its infant mortality rates. He notes that currently the United States has a worse infant mortality rate than Russia. It's one of the, again, striking facts of the book. So again, it's this sense that there's a military machine of the empire that no longer has at its heart a culture carrying intelligence. It's one of the key ideas in the book. And then the third main idea that's really focused on is what he describes as the true nature of the United States. There's a whole chapter on this. The true nature of the United States is nihilism and oligarchy. Again, he uses the common phrase from the Obama era of the blob to describe, the elites in, again, the sense of a disconnected elite without social mooring. And I'll get into the detail of nihilism and oligarchy again. But again, I've talked to a few people who've said, oh, the French always hate Americans and all this kind of thing. And that's really not the viewpoint that Emmanuel Todd comes from. In very many ways, he comes from he was educated in Britain. He comes from a very sympathetic viewpoint towards America. Indeed, he writes here that it seemed necessary to me to have a central concept that symbolized America's conversion from good to evil. Our intellectual problem deep down is that we love America. The US was one of the powers that brought down Nazism. They showed us the way to achieve prosperity and relaxation. I think that word's been translated oddly, but to fully accept the idea that today they follow a path that leads to poverty and social atomization, the concept of nihilism is essential. So he's sort of kind of separating from his own emotional attachment to the Anglo-American world to look at it from a historical sociological viewpoint in this book. And perhaps that's also reflected in his decision to not translate the book into English, at least not yet. And then finally, in all of this, he's very much of a school which is widely articulated in English language books that he quotes about the idea that we're in some kind of post-democracy. Indeed, he says the West is not a liberal democracy, but a liberal oligarchy. So they're the three main ideas. What I want to do now is sort of do chapter by chapter and just outline, both the range of the book and maybe just comment on a few really key points within each of these chapters so you get a sense of it. And this is the complete, I guess, the table of contents, so to speak, of the book. And it starts with this chapter called The 10 Surprises of the War, because, again, he sort of presents the book as saying What's really interesting is to notice something that you weren't expecting in the world and then use that as a basis for explanation. So he talks about these 10 surprises of the war, and those 10 surprises sort of lead into his subsequent chapters, really. So he talks about how Russian society is stronger than people were expecting, that the Ukrainian society has behaved in different ways to what people expected, that the most intense parts of anti-Russian sentiment in Europe are in the parts of Europe that used to be in the Soviet Union. He defines the West, and this is where some of those sort of arguments about Protestantism come through. He talks about the assisted suicide of Europe. He talks about Britain, scathing analysis of Britain, Scandinavia, the discussion of oligarchy and nihilism in America, and then 2 more chapters looking at the American economy and the American political system, the Washington Gang, which is the chapter I think I did a YouTube video that you watched, Charlotte. And then a final chapter on why the rest of the world was more supportive of Russia ultimately than the sort of Western countries in the diplomatic conflict around Ukraine. And then there is a narrative chapter which sort of brings this sort of sociological analysis together into the actual events of the Russia-Ukraine conflict from 1990, from the date of the collapse of the Soviet Union to 2022. And as we'll see, it's all based also on statistics. And then he actually finished writing the book in September last year, 2023. And then the events in Gaza happened, and so he wrote a brief postscript that's in the book on the way in which those events are a proof of American nihilism. So let's look at those 10 surprises. As you can see, they are the chapters follow to some degree from the surprises very much. It sort of defines the structure of the book. And he says the 10th and final surprise is about to materialize. This is the defeat of the West. We will be surprised by such an assertion when the war is not over. But this defeat is a certainty because the West self-destructs rather than being attacked by Russia. So again, it's that sense of it's the Western crisis which is driving these events rather than actions by Russia. Then he looks at Russian stability, and in this chapter, he again uses his demographic base, his demographic discipline to talk about the successful stabilization of Russia after the disastrous period in the 1990s. Again, he looks at life expectancy, suicide rates, homicide rates, crime rates, child health sort of outcomes, that sort of thing. He also looks at the economic recovery of Russia, a range of different statistics. And I think the IMF has recently recognised that Russia is now the fourth largest economy in the world on purchasing power parity terms. Similar sort of issues are brought out, are included there. And then he has a little chapter that talks about how Russia, I guess, successfully responded to the economic warfare dimension of the Russia-Ukraine war, NATO-Russia-Ukraine war, where the sanctions from hell, the attempt to turn the ruble into rubble, were parried, and in some ways the sanctions actually helped Russia's economy. He's got a range of statistics, etc., to support that argument. Then he says, Putin is not Stalin. Here's a chapter to say Putin is not Stalin. He's a different kind of character in a different set of political institutions, in a very different political culture. And I think one of his key points in terms of often many of his public appearances is, he's been accused of being a Putin puppet and all that sort of thing. And he said that one of the problems in Western responses in this situation, perhaps especially in Europe, where he's most concerned about, is, people keep telling themselves lies about Putin rather than seeing the reality of this individual and this decision maker, or this political culture as well. The sort of traditional conflation of contemporary Russia with, 1930s, 1940s, 1950s Soviet Union under Stalin is sort of often done rhetorically, but is just unsupportable by real facts. Then he also, again, looks at detailed statistics and develops an argument that he also made in Lineages of Humanity. It's the lineages of, is it modernity or of humanity? I've forgotten now. Modernity, yes. That the way in which Western and non-Western education systems have developed has diverged to some degree, and that Russia, with a half or a third of the population of the United States, actually produces, through its education system, more engineers to support the real economy, if you like, rather than America. And he also explores some aspects of, I guess, middle-class life and the growth of middle-class life, the change in Russia as well, and again, rooted in his analysis of different family systems in different societies, with a more collective sort of family system in Russia. Reflects that similarly in attitudes to homophobia or LGBTI type issues, and emphasizes that part of the stability of Russia is, despite the inequalities, there is in fact general support for the regime. But he ends this chapter with an argument about, there is a decline in fertility in Russia as well. There's Russia's had a unique, and all the Soviet Union states have had a unique demographic history, particularly Russia, I guess, but with the enormous loss of life in the in World War II, the impact of the gulags, etc., and then of course the collapse in life expectancy, particularly male life expectancy, in the 1990s. So he says there's a sort of there is a young male problem, a scarcity of young men in Russia, and that might have affected the strategic thinking of Russia, that they had a demographic window over the next 5 years in which they might need to mobilize their army rather than wait until they were in sort of population decline. So it's a really quite extensive analysis of Russia, which goes well beyond what you normally hear. And he does the same sort of thing with Ukraine.